Welcome to another episode of Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton. And today what we're dealing with is the issue of so-called left and right, in politics. You hear those terms an awful lot. What do they mean? And typically what is meant by them is we're talking about, say, liberal or leftist, and then we're talking about conservatives or right wing. But the terminologies have always been a little bit murky, and they're just really getting worse all the time. And a term that I occasionally see showing up on social media is one woke right. Now, this is an idiotic term. It makes absolutely no sense. And but it doesn't matter how often I say it, because there are a lot of people who will still, cling to this as though there is such a thing as woke right or alt right, the alternative right. Now, sometimes we use a term like alt-right because it's the one that sort of has been established in the culture, and so that you don't have to spend 10 minutes explaining what you mean, you just go along and use the terminology because, that's what's there. That's the nomenclature. But sometimes the nomenclature itself needs to be changed. In this case, it really does need to be changed because, again, this makes no sense at all. This is terminology that is either a psyop, or it's being promoted by people who have no idea what they're talking about. So let me explain to you what left and right actually mean. But let me first start by explaining to you the way it is traditionally taught. So when I'm getting my bachelor's degree, when I'm going through graduate school and I'm studying all of the isms, Marxism and socialism and fascism and Bolshevism and, just on and on, you would often hear, and of course, probably, I remember saying on social media not so long ago, I'd said that probably a third of my professors were Marxists, and a friend of mine later said to me, who was in graduate school with me and who is now a professor of history, he said, no, I'd say 3/4 of them were Marxists. So this is probably the reason why it was taught this way. But usually it looks something like this. They would argue that the so-called extreme right, and I'm going to do it where this is your right, leads to fascism. The fascism, Nazism. So extreme right is fascism. This is the way the argument went. And then the extreme left, so again, the political left, that this is socialism or communism. That when we look across the political spectrum, this is what we see. And of course, this is the one that the left loves to carry on about. So they're always talking about how Trump is a fascist or he's a Nazi. The New Republic, before the election, took an image of Trump's face, and then they took Hitler's haircut and the mustache and made Trump look like Adolf Hitler. And how many times have we seen, a guy like David Frum, at the Atlantic, publishes a piece of, the Nuremberg rallies, and again, portraying Trump as a Nazi, and portraying anybody who voted for him as a fascist. That's the extreme right. Well, let's think about this for just a minute. How does this make any sense? How can you go in opposite directions and arrive at the same place? And they would say that they're not the same place. They would say that this and this, they have nothing in common, or very little in common. I would say they're wrong. The only differences between fascism and communism at its root are this. Fascists believed in private property, but private property that is used for state purposes. They believed fascism is a strict regimentation of the economy for war. We are seeing that now, but who are we seeing it from? The Trump administration? No, we're seeing it on the political left. Democrats, ESG, DEI, that's fascist stuff. Attacking, a specific race, in this case, white people these days, all over the Western world, all by the political left, is fascist. It's just exactly what the Nazis did. They just did it a little bit different. They went after Jews. And by the way, the left is going after Jews as well. So actually, fascism and communism have a lot in common because they both arrived at the same place, which is what? Both of them arrive at totalitarianism. Both of them are totalitarian ideologies. You cannot go in the opposite direction and this arrive at the same place, which is totalitarianism. And communism, just so you'll understand the difference, that while fascists believe in private property, they just believe it's controlled by the state, communists claim they don't believe in private property, and of course it's all owned by the state. But otherwise, there's very little difference. I mean, this is sees history. You know, it's what Karl Popper called a historicist scheme. This idea that history is predetermined, that we are moving irresistibly in a particular direction. Not the way the Bible would argue it, from Genesis to Revelation chapter 22, but that it's a war of the blood. And this maintains, no, it's a war of economic classes. But again, in terms of governance, they're both totalitarian. And so how do you arrive at the same place when you're going in opposite directions? Well, you arrive at them if in going in opposite directions, you're really going in a circle. You see? So what I was taught as an undergraduate and what I was taught in graduate school was something much like this. And hence, the political left loves the idea of a woke right. Woke right, again, makes no sense. You cannot go to the right, which is conservatism, and arrive at wokedom, at tyranny. It just simply doesn't happen. So let's look at, I love this board. This is pretty handy. Let's look at, people will wonder, what did you do with the blackboard? The blackboard was impossible to erase. It was just impossible to erase. You just couldn't. It was too hard and it took too long in between shoots. So what is the reality of political right and political left? So again, the left and the right. Going to the left, you arrive at tyranny. You arrive at increasingly strict governance. You arrive at totalitarianism. You arrive at tyranny. The further you go to the left, that's where you arrive. And that's fascism, that's socialism, that's communism, it's Marxism. That's where you are. There's hardly a hair's difference between those ideologies. And so that you'll properly understand socialism, which fascism is an offshoot of, it's like a bastard child of socialism. Communism is deemed to be, and it's never been achieved and will never be achieved, but in the in communist parlance, rather socialist parlance, communism is the highest stage of socialism. It's having reached the socialist utopia. It has never been achieved, will never be achieved, and thus the way we use the term is generally wrong, but again, we have to use the terms that are available to us. But you go to the left, you're not going in a circle, you're going in a straight line. And the further you go to the left, the more tyrannous, the more totalitarian it becomes. You go to the right, the extreme right, the extreme right isn't fascism. The extreme right is anarchy. Meaning, the further you go to the left, the more government. The further you go to the right, the less governance. We would say that, say, for instance, like libertarianism sits somewhere in here. It's further to the right than traditional conservatism. I hope this makes this clear. So less government control, more government control. And then we slide up and down, like that weight at the doctor's office, where you're moving up and down on the scale, determining depending on how much government control that you want. And the tendency has been for governments to move increasingly to the left. Greater tyranny, less freedom, far more control. This is where AI will take us. This is where surveillance state. You go to Britain, their most surveilled city anywhere outside of China. There's very little freedom, almost none. Certainly no freedom of speech. And this is the direction the left wants to take us. And it's why they love the technology. When I go to the World Economic Forum, they are orgasmic over technology. And they are because they see it as their opportunity to control you. And that's leftism. So when you hear people say, fascism, which is a tyrannous ideology, that fascism is a product of the right, it's absolute nonsense. The extreme right is anarchy. The extreme left is extreme government control. We seek to be somewhere right of center. Now, there's more to this. There's a social component to this. And that involves, honest to goodness, conservatism. It isn't, how shall I put it? Honest to goodness conservatism isn't a garnish on your ideological plate. Honest to goodness conservatism, it is a worldview. It's the entree. It defines the way you see the world. And I would say that the father of modern conservatism would be a figure like Edmund Burke, the silver-tongued Irishman, parliamentarian who argued against the French Revolution, but in favor of, or at least in defense of, the American Revolution for reasons that are worth reading. You can go and read his book, Reflections on the Revolution of France. Even now, it reads as a document that's very, very relevant. And then straight on down from there, there's been a great many other great conservative thinkers, but I would start with Edmund Burke. And it's a worldview that is rooted in a Judeo-Christian worldview, chiefly with the Decalogue, with the Ten Commandments. That it springs forth from that because it believes, conservatives believe in what we call unalienable rights. That rights aren't given to us by government, rights are given to us by God. When you take the view that rights are something that are bequeathed to you, bestowed upon you by government, you're over here, whether you know it or not. If you are so-called woke, you're over here. You can no more say that you are woke and on the right than you can say that you are simultaneously a Red Sox fan and a Yankees fan. At some point, your fandom comes into conflict because they play each other. You can't be both. You can't be both. So, extreme right isn't tyranny, it's anarchy. Extreme left is extreme tyranny. That's what this is. I hope this is helpful for you in understanding this because, again, you might have been taught, as many were, because our educational system is permeated with Marxist teaching, Marxist thought, and Marxists themselves that will teach you this kind of stuff. And who will claim, now you see terms like this, it's just absolutely stupid. And anybody who is arguing that's, again, it's either a psyop meant to make you suspicious of the so-called right, genuine right, or it's being promoted by people who just have no understanding of what we're talking about politically. And by the way, while I'm at it, why I think this is incredibly important for you to understand is you have heard me addressing figures like, let's say, Andrew Tate and Candace Owens and Tim Keller within the evangelical world. He was well known. Who else? Jordan Peterson and David French and Russell Moore. Because those were all figures that people argued were over here. Minus that they argued they were individuals over on the right side of the spectrum. And why I have warned you against them is because I was always saying to you, no, they're over here. They are masquerading as being on the right. Or, and again, this is the case with Elon Musk, they're individuals in every case of those that I just mentioned, with the exception of Russell Moore and David French, I think, and to some extent, Tim Keller. They're individuals who are anti-woke. And you see, when you see someone who is anti-woke, it's easy to think that they share your worldview. But then, as the devil, as they say, is in the details. And when you start drilling down into what they actually believe, you find out they're over here. That's important to understand. So you need to be able to properly identify before you latch on too quickly to big personalities, who are out there, in the culture. Before you so easily become, I'm all in on all things Elon Musk, I'm all in on all things Andrew Tate, or I'm all in on all things Jordan Peterson. You need to understand what their worldview, what the basis of their worldview actually is, not just their opinion on a few individual things. Being against the mutilation of children doesn't make you a conservative. That just makes you somebody who's got at least a little bit of sense. I mean, used to, people on the left believe that as well, but they don't anymore. And that's because leftism is all sail, no anchor. It's not actually rooted in any absolute at all. Whereas conservatism, authentic conservatism, is rooted in an absolute. It's rooted in universal principles that we find expressed in Scripture. Hope this is helpful. This has been another episode of Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton.